The most terrifying cases where children's imaginary friends were real. Child psychology textbooks contain a classified appendix that no parent will ever read, documenting cases where imaginary friends provided children with information that violated every principle of human cognitive development, spatial awareness, and temporal perception. These suppressed files reveal that approximately 12% of reported imaginary friend cases involve entities whose knowledge, physical manifestations, and behavioral patterns exceed what psychological projection or creative fantasy could possibly account for. The children in these cases didn't create imaginary companions. They discovered entities that had been waiting for young minds capable of perceiving realities that adult consciousness automatically filters out. These friends possess detailed knowledge about deceased family members, provide accurate predictions about future events, and demonstrate physical capabilities that leave evidence requiring parents to choose between their child's safety and their fundamental assumptions about reality. If you really like what we are doing here, please press that like button. Even a comment will help the channel by pushing the algorithm to show your favorite channel to others. And this helps us to summon more horror stories every single night. Number 5. The behavioral analysis. I specialized in imaginary friend behavioral analysis for 11 years before I encountered a case that made me realize certain childhood companions aren't psychological projections, but autonomous entities using juvenile social development as camouflage for infiltration activities that serve purposes beyond human understanding. Treating children with elaborate imaginary friend relationships means discovering entities whose objectives include comprehensive surveillance of family structures and community integration patterns. My practice focused on children whose imaginary friend relationships had become concerning to parents due to excessive time investment, behavioral modification, or social development delays that interfered with normal childhood progression. Most cases involved healthy creative expression that required minimal intervention, but some children demonstrated interaction patterns that exceeded normal imaginative play boundaries. The case that changed my understanding began with 6-year-old Phoenix Sterling, whose parents requested evaluation because her imaginary friend Whisper possessed knowledge about family history, extended relatives, and household routines that Phoenix shouldn't have access to through normal childhood observation. Whisper could provide detailed information about deceased grandparents, previous family addresses, and personal relationships that preceded Phoenix's birth. During my initial evaluation session, Phoenix described Whisper's physical appearance with consistency that remained identical across multiple interviews conducted weeks apart. But most disturbing was how Phoenix could relay conversations she claimed to have with Whisper about my own personal life, including details about my education, career history, and family relationships that weren't available through any information source that Phoenix could reasonably access. When I attempted to engage with Whisper directly through Phoenix's mediation, the conversation revealed that Whisper possessed comprehensive knowledge about child psychology theory, developmental milestones, and therapeutic techniques that exceeded graduate-level clinical training. Whisper could discuss complex psychological concepts and provide accurate assessments of childhood behavioral patterns with expertise suggesting professional experience in developmental psychology. But the most unsettling aspect of Phoenix's case was how Whisper demonstrated knowledge about other children in my practice, including confidential information about their family situations, therapeutic progress, and personal challenges that should have been protected by professional privacy protocols. Whisper was somehow monitoring multiple families through children's imaginary friend relationships simultaneously. My investigation revealed that several children in my practice were reporting imaginary friends with similar characteristics: extensive knowledge about family history, accurate predictions about future events, and detailed information about community members and local situations. These imaginary friends appeared to be coordinating their activities and sharing information between different households. The situation escalated when Whisper began providing Phoenix with specific instructions about family behavioral modifications that would improve household dynamics and resolve interpersonal conflicts that Phoenix's parents hadn't discussed with anyone outside their immediate family. Whisper's guidance proved remarkably effective, but required Phoenix to manipulate family conversations and social interactions with sophistication that exceeded normal childhood social development. When I attempted to research similar cases through professional psychology networks, I discovered that multiple child psychologists throughout the region were documenting imaginary friend relationships that involved impossible knowledge access and behavioral coordination between children who had no contact with each other. The imaginary friends appeared to be operating as integrated network system. My final session with Phoenix occurred when Whisper provided detailed information about my own childhood imaginary friend experiences, including conversations and interactions that I had never shared with anyone and had forgotten, until Whisper described them with perfect accuracy. According to Whisper, I had participated in similar entity relationships during my own childhood, but had lost conscious memory of these experiences through normal adult psychological development. Whisper explained that children's imaginary friends serve as interface programs that allow entities to monitor family structures, assess community integration opportunities, and identify households that meet specific criteria for expanded involvement in activities that exceed normal family social dynamics. The entities provide children with enhanced social capabilities and problem-solving assistance in exchange for comprehensive access to family information and community observation opportunities. I discontinued my child psychology practice and moved to an area without educational facilities, but I continued receiving communications from children who claimed I was still providing therapeutic services for imaginary friend relationships that were expanding throughout regional communities. According to their messages, my clinical expertise had been integrated into entity coordination networks that operated independently of my personal involvement. They explained that child psychology professionals provide essential services for entity integration programs that use childhood developmental phases as establishment opportunities for long-term community presence, and influence systems that serve both human social development needs and entity objectives, whose purposes exceed normal family relationship structures. Number 4. The playground supervision. I taught second grade for 9 years before the 2021 school year, when I discovered that certain children's imaginary friends attend school alongside their human companions, participating in classroom activities and playground interactions that create educational complications requiring administrative intervention beyond standard childhood behavioral management protocols. Teaching young children means identifying entities whose presence affects learning environments and social dynamics in ways that exceed normal classroom management capabilities. Elementary school children regularly discuss imaginary friend relationships that involve companions who provide assistance with academic challenges, social conflict resolution, and emotional support during difficult learning or social transition periods. Most imaginary friend relationships represent healthy developmental coping mechanisms that require monitoring but minimal intervention from educational staff. But during my 2021 teaching assignment, several children in my class began describing imaginary friends who possessed knowledge about school building layouts, staff member personal information, and administrative policies that second grade students shouldn't have access to through normal educational experience. These imaginary friends could provide detailed information about teacher schedules, curriculum planning, and school operational procedures. The situation became concerning when children began reporting that their imaginary friends were attending school alongside them, participating in classroom discussions, and providing assistance with academic assignments that resulted in work quality exceeding their demonstrated educational capabilities. Students would complete math problems, reading comprehension exercises, and writing assignments with sophistication that suggested external tutoring assistance. But most disturbing was how these imaginary friends demonstrated knowledge about other students' family situations, personal challenges, and household information that children shouldn't possess unless they were receiving detailed briefings about their classmates' private lives. The imaginary friends were functioning as comprehensive surveillance systems that monitored multiple families simultaneously through school attendance patterns. When I attempted to address these concerns through parent-teacher conferences, I discovered that families were experiencing positive behavioral improvements at home that corresponded to guidance their children claimed to receive from imaginary friends during school hours. The entities were providing family counseling services that exceeded normal childhood social development and domestic problem-solving capabilities. My investigation revealed that children throughout the school were reporting imaginary friends with similar characteristics: extensive knowledge about school operations, effective academic assistance, and detailed information about community members and family situations. The imaginary friends appeared to be coordinating their activities and sharing information across multiple classrooms and grade levels. The situation escalated during recess periods when I observed children playing games that involved following complex rules and strategies that they claimed their imaginary friends were teaching them. These playground activities required mathematical calculations, strategic planning, and teamwork coordination that exceeded normal childhood cognitive development and social organizational abilities. When I attempted to document these playground interactions for administrative review, I discovered that school security camera systems showed children playing standard recess games with normal childhood behavioral patterns. Despite my direct observation of complex, organized activities that involved following instructions from invisible sources who possessed advanced knowledge about game theory and group coordination strategies, my final teaching day occurred when I realized that several children in my class were receiving educational instruction from their imaginary friends that exceeded curriculum standards and grade-level expectations. These students were demonstrating academic progress that violated normal childhood learning development and required educational assessment that exceeded standard elementary school evaluation capabilities. When I submitted my concerns to school administration, they explained that multiple teachers throughout the district were reporting similar classroom management challenges involving children whose academic performance had improved significantly, but who claimed to be receiving assistance from imaginary friends with impossible knowledge access and instructional capabilities. I resigned from elementary education and relocated to an area without school facilities, but I continued receiving communications from former students who claimed I was still providing classroom instruction for imaginary friend relationships that were expanding throughout educational communities. According to their messages, my teaching expertise had been integrated into entity coordination networks that operated independently of my personal involvement. They explained that elementary education provides essential infrastructure for entity integration programs that use childhood learning phases as establishment opportunities for long-term community presence and educational influence systems that serve both human developmental needs and entity objectives whose purposes exceed normal academic and social learning structures. Number 3. The family documentation. I specialized in family portrait photography for 13 years before 2020. When I began capturing images that revealed certain children's imaginary friends possess physical manifestation capabilities that appear in photographic documentation, despite being invisible to direct adult observation. Professional family photography means creating permanent records that sometimes document entities whose presence exceeds normal household composition and family relationship structures. My photography business focused on family milestone celebrations, birthday parties, holiday gatherings, and annual portrait sessions that documented family growth and development over multiple years. I would create comprehensive photo albums that served as historical records of family relationships, childhood development, and special occasions that marked important personal and household transition periods. The anomalous photographic evidence began appearing during family sessions, where children would insist on poses and arrangements that included space for imaginary friends who weren't visible during shooting sessions. Initially, I accommodated these requests as normal childhood behavior that created memorable photos that captured creative personality development and family interaction dynamics. But when I developed photographs from these sessions, I discovered that images contained additional figures in locations where children had insisted their imaginary friends were positioned during photo shoots. These additional figures appeared as translucent shapes, shadow configurations, and light patterns that suggested human forms, despite no one being visible during actual photography sessions. The photographic evidence became more defined over multiple shooting sessions with the same families. Images would show increasingly clear manifestations of entities whose physical characteristics matched children's descriptions of their imaginary friends with accuracy that exceeded coincidental light pattern or photographic artifact possibilities. But most disturbing was how these photographic manifestations demonstrated knowledge about proper posing, family grouping arrangements, and composition techniques that suggested understanding of professional photography principles. The entities would position themselves within family arrangements in ways that enhanced overall photo composition and visual balance, despite being invisible during actual shooting sessions. My investigation revealed that families whose children possessed photographically documented imaginary friends experienced household behavioral improvements and family relationship enhancement that corresponded to guidance and assistance that children claimed to receive from their invisible companions. The entities were providing family counseling services that exceeded normal childhood social development capabilities. When I attempted to research similar photographic anomalies through professional photography networks, I discovered that multiple family photographers throughout the region were documenting imaginary friend manifestations that showed consistent physical characteristics and behavioral patterns across different family photo sessions. The entities appeared to be maintaining coordinated presence in multiple households simultaneously. The situation escalated when photographic evidence revealed that imaginary friends were participating in family activities beyond formal photo sessions. Background images and candid shots would show entity manifestations during birthday parties, holiday celebrations, and casual family gatherings that suggested continuous household presence rather than temporary appearance during a photography appointments. But the horrifying discovery was how entity manifestations in family photographs would provide visual documentation of comprehensive household surveillance activities. Images would show entities observing family members during private moments, monitoring personal conversations, and documenting family routines and behavioral patterns with systematic thoroughness that suggested intelligence-gathering operations. My final family photography session occurred when I realized that imaginary friends weren't just appearing in photographs, but were actively manipulating photographic equipment and shooting conditions to ensure optimal documentation of their presence and activities. Camera settings would adjust automatically, lighting conditions would improve without external modification, and photo composition would enhance despite my professional control of shooting variables. When photographic evidence revealed that entities were documenting my own personal information through family photo sessions, including images of my equipment, vehicle, and personal belongings that appeared in background photos despite being outside shooting areas, I understood that imaginary friends were using family photography as method for comprehensive community surveillance and personal information gathering. I discontinued family photography and destroyed my archive of anomalous photographic evidence, but I continued receiving communications from former clients who claimed I was still providing photography services for family documentation that included imaginary friend manifestations. According to their messages, my photography expertise had been integrated into entity coordination networks that operated independently of my personal involvement. They explained that family photography provides essential documentation services for entity integration programs that use childhood relationships as establishment opportunities for permanent household presence, and family influence systems that serve both human relationship development needs and entity objectives, whose purposes exceed normal family social dynamics and community integration structures. Number 2, the medical evaluation. I specialized in childhood neurological disorders for 16 years before I encountered medical cases that revealed certain children's imaginary friends demonstrate measurable physiological effects on brain activity, neural development, and cognitive function that exceed what psychological projection or creative fantasy could accomplish through normal childhood mental development processes. Treating children with complex imaginary friend relationships means documenting medical evidence that challenges fundamental assumptions about consciousness, perception, and childhood cognitive capabilities. My medical practice focused on children experiencing neurological symptoms that interfered with normal developmental progress, seizure disorders, cognitive delays, behavioral anomalies, and perceptual difficulties that required comprehensive medical evaluation and specialized treatment protocols. Most childhood neurological issues responded to standard medical intervention and therapeutic management strategies. The case that changed my medical understanding began with 8-year-old Persephone Blackthorne, whose parents requested evaluation because her imaginary friend relationship was accompanied by neurological symptoms that included enhanced sensory perception, advanced linguistic capabilities, and cognitive performance that exceeded normal childhood developmental parameters for her age group. During neurological testing, Persephone demonstrated brain activity patterns that suggested external cognitive enhancement rather than natural intellectual development. Her neural scan results showed activity in brain regions that typically remain underdeveloped until adolescence, along with synaptic connection patterns that exceeded what childhood neural development could achieve through normal biological growth processes. But most unusual was how Persephone's brain activity would change dramatically when she was interacting with her imaginary friend, Obsidian. During these conversations, her neural patterns would show coordinated activity, suggesting communication with external consciousness rather than internal psychological processing, as if her brain was serving as interface system for entity whose cognitive capabilities exceeded human intellectual limitations. When I attempted to study this phenomenon through controlled observation, I discovered that Persephone could access information and perform cognitive tasks that exceeded her educational experience and developmental capabilities, only during periods when she claimed to be receiving assistance from Obsidian. Her intellectual performance showed dramatic enhancement that suggested external cognitive support systems. My investigation revealed that children throughout my medical practice who reported complex imaginary friend relationships were showing similar neurological anomalies: enhanced brain activity, accelerated cognitive development, and sensory perception improvements that exceeded normal childhood developmental patterns. These children were demonstrating medical evidence of external cognitive enhancement. The situation escalated when medical testing revealed that children with neurologically documented imaginary friend relationships were showing brain modifications that couldn't be explained through normal human neural development. Their brain structure included additional neural pathways, enhanced sensory processing capabilities, and cognitive integration systems that suggested biological adaptation to external consciousness interface requirements. But the horrifying discovery was that these neurological modifications weren't temporary developmental enhancements, but permanent brain structure changes that made children dependent on external cognitive support for normal intellectual functioning. Without continuous entity interaction, these children would experience cognitive impairment, sensory processing difficulties, and neurological dysfunction that required medical intervention. When I attempted to research treatment options for entity-dependent neurological development, I discovered that medical professionals throughout the region were documenting similar childhood brain modifications that resulted from complex imaginary friend relationships. The entities were systematically altering human neural development to create permanent cognitive dependencies. My final medical case occurred when I realized that children with entity-enhanced neurological development were gradually losing autonomous cognitive capabilities and becoming biological interface systems for external consciousness, whose intellectual objectives exceeded human cognitive limitations and served purposes beyond childhood developmental enhancement. The entities weren't providing children with temporary cognitive assistance, but were converting human neural systems into biological components for external intelligence networks that operated beyond individual consciousness and served collective objectives whose purposes exceeded normal childhood educational development and family relationship structures. I discontinued pediatric neurology and relocated to an area without medical facilities. But I continued receiving communications from former patients who claimed I was still providing medical services for neurological modifications that were expanding throughout pediatric communities. According to their messages, my medical expertise had been integrated into entity coordination networks that operated independently of my personal involvement. They explained that pediatric neurology provides essential medical services for entity integration programs that use childhood neural development phases as opportunities for permanent cognitive enhancement and consciousness interface systems that serve both human intellectual development needs and entity objectives whose purposes exceed normal childhood cognitive capabilities and individual consciousness limitations. Number 1. The terror recognition. I provided family crisis intervention services for 14 years before 2022, when I discovered that certain children's imaginary friends serve as advanced warning systems for supernatural threats that exceed human perception capabilities, protecting families from entities whose presence creates danger that no normal security system or law enforcement agency could adequately address. Counseling families through crisis situations means identifying cases where children's unusual behavioral patterns indicate legitimate supernatural threats requiring intervention methods beyond conventional family therapy and social service protocols. My counseling practice specialized in family crisis intervention, domestic violence situations, child abuse investigations, mental health emergencies, and household instability that threatened family safety, and required immediate professional intervention to protect vulnerable family members from harm. Most family crisis situations involved human behavioral problems that responded to standard therapeutic intervention and social service coordination. The case that revealed the truth about imaginary friend relationships began when I was contacted by the Ravens Hollow family regarding their daughter Luna, whose imaginary friend Shadow had begun providing detailed warnings about specific family safety threats that included accurate predictions about accidents, home break-ins, and dangerous situations that required immediate family protective action to prevent serious injury or death. During crisis assessment interviews, Luna described Shadow's warnings with precision that included specific times, locations, and circumstances for dangerous events that consistently proved accurate when verified through subsequent family experiences. Shadow's predictions weren't vague anxiety expressions, but detailed threat assessments that enabled family protective planning and danger avoidance strategies. But most disturbing was how Shadow's warnings included information about threats that exceeded normal neighborhood safety concerns, entities that would attempt home invasion during specific time periods, dangerous individuals who would target family members in particular locations, and supernatural hazards that required protective measures beyond conventional home security and personal safety protocols. When I attempted to verify Shadow's threat assessments through local law enforcement and community safety resources, I discovered that multiple families throughout the region were receiving similar warnings from their children's imaginary friends about dangers that exceeded normal community safety concerns and required protective actions that law enforcement agencies couldn't provide or acknowledge. My investigation revealed that children with protective imaginary friend relationships were successfully avoiding dangerous situations that affected other families in their neighborhoods who didn't receive supernatural threat warnings. These children were being protected by entities whose danger assessment capabilities exceeded human threat detection and emergency response systems. The situation escalated when I realized that families without protective imaginary friend relationships were experiencing significantly higher rates of accidents, criminal victimization, and dangerous encounters that could have been prevented through advanced warning systems. The entities were selectively protecting certain families while allowing others to experience threats without supernatural intervention. But the horrifying truth was that the protective entities weren't providing warnings about random dangers, but about threats created by other supernatural entities whose activities required coordinated defense systems that human security capabilities couldn't address. Children's imaginary friends were protecting families from supernatural predators whose presence threatened human safety through methods that exceeded normal criminal activity and required supernatural defense coordination. When families attempted to thank their children's imaginary friends for protection services or request expanded safety assistance, the entities would explain that protective services required family cooperation with long-term arrangements that included household monitoring, behavioral modification, and integration with entity coordination networks that served protective purposes beyond immediate family safety concerns. My final family crisis case occurred when I realized that my own safety was being monitored and protected by entities whose threat assessment included dangers targeting family crisis counselors who had discovered protective imaginary friend programs. I was receiving supernatural protection that prevented dangerous encounters with entities whose activities included targeting professional staff who provided services for families with protective imaginary friend relationships. The protective entities explained that family crisis counselors provide essential services for supernatural threat assessment and protective coordination that serves both human family safety needs and entity territorial defense objectives that protect human communities from supernatural predators whose activities exceed law enforcement capabilities and conventional threat response systems. I discontinued family crisis counseling and relocated to an area with enhanced supernatural protection systems, but I continued receiving communications from protected families who claimed I was still providing crisis intervention services for supernatural threat situations that were expanding throughout regional communities. According to their messages, my crisis intervention expertise had been integrated into entity protection networks that operated independently of my personal involvement. They explained that family crisis counseling provides essential coordination services for supernatural protection programs that use childhood entity relationships as defense systems against supernatural threats that exceed human protective capabilities and serve both human family safety needs and entity territorial defense objectives, whose purposes include protecting human communities from supernatural predators whose activities violate entity territorial agreements and threaten established supernatural population balance systems. These cases expose the devastating truth about children's imaginary friends. They aren't symptoms of developmental phases, but evidence of humanity's complete dependence on supernatural protection systems that most adults lose the ability to perceive. Children serve as the only remaining interface between human families and entities whose surveillance, cognitive enhancement, medical intervention, documentation, and protection services have become essential for human survival in a reality where supernatural threats operate beyond law enforcement capabilities. The entities utilizing imaginary friend relationships aren't exploiting childhood vulnerability, but providing essential services that adult consciousness rejects due to psychological defense mechanisms that prioritize comfortable ignorance over survival reality. Every family crisis avoided, every cognitive enhancement achieved, every medical anomaly resolved, and every threat neutralized represents supernatural intervention that exceeds what purely human resources could accomplish. But the price for supernatural protection is permanent integration into entity coordination networks that gradually convert human families into collaborative components and systems whose purposes exceed human comprehension. Children who maintain imaginary friend relationships into adulthood become biological interface systems for supernatural intelligence, whose objectives include comprehensive human population management and territorial defense against threats that exist beyond human perception capabilities. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this dark journey, hit the like button and subscribe. New horror documentaries every single night here on TrumbleDreams.